Chris Cowlin. Fan cams. Club news. Transfer news. Match previews. Legend interviews. Spurs winning. Press conferences. Covering everything Tottenham and England.
Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to bring back Ryan Taylor, sports journalist with the Daily Mail. Ryan, it's been such a long while since you were last on here. How are you?
All good, thanks, Chris. Although it's the Mirror, not the Mail.
So
They're
sorry.
all the same, aren't they?
The Daily Mirror. The Daily Mirror. Of course, you have been absolutely everywhere lately. Of course, you've been at the Euros. Of course, you've seen many great players play at Euro 2024. Ryan, it's all happening now as we approach the 3-week stage of the transfer deadline day. It looks like Dominic Solanke will be signing for Spurs. What is the very latest on this situation?
So I saw obviously the breakthrough that was reported this morning by Duncan Castles, and then David Ornstein followed that up as well. So I did check it out, and obviously there's not too much that the clubs can say at this moment in time, but there is confidence a deal is going to be done and talks are advanced between the clubs. From what I understand, similarly to what Paul O'Keefe has reported, it's looking like it's probably going to be 57 million up front with 3 million in add-ons, although it's a 60 million pound package, which is, of course, a little bit less than Solanke's release clause, although there's been a few mixed reports on this. So,
yeah,
the main kind of report that's been out there is that, and what I've been told is Solanke's release clause is 65 million pounds, but it can only be triggered by certain clubs, which I assume, but I don't know for a fact, is by clubs that are either playing European football or considered to be among England's big six. Solanke wants to move. He's not agitated for a move behind the scenes, but I believe he's told Bournemouth in private talks that he wants to join. Although he fully respects Bournemouth. Obviously, they've played a big part in his career, sort of starting to fulfil his potential that we saw when he was an academy talent at Chelsea and when he first went to Liverpool. And Spurs want to get this done, and I believe it's going to get done. Things have really ramped up sort of in the last 48 hours. I believe talks only formally started between the clubs last night. Obviously, there have been some conversations behind the scenes. I think Fabrizio was the first, obviously, to report that Tottenham were considering Solanke as a top target, and just spoken in the Far East about the fact a striker is a priority, and Solanke fits the bill. Stylistically, I know there's some scepticism about whether Solanke's a good fit for Spurs, but actually, if you look what Ange wants from his strikers, I think Solanke is going to be a really great signing. He's a beast in the box. He likes to shoot. He gets a lot of shots off during the game. He presses from the front. He can hold it up. He's a real focal point in the attack, and I think that's precisely why Spurs are going to do this deal. And he's homegrown. Spurs need homegrown players, so he ticks multiple boxes for the club.
Ryan, you put out an article with the Daily Mirror earlier today stating that Bournemouth are frustrated by the timing of this, but the player does want the move, doesn't he?
Yeah, so what I meant by that is obviously Spurs have been looking for a striker all summer, but it's just unfortunate for Bournemouth that they've decided to step up the Solanke interests within a week of the season starting. Now, Bournemouth are well aware that there has been a good chance Solanke could leave this summer. Obviously, he scored 19 Premier League goals last year. And he's got the release clause. So ultimately, right up until the deadline, there was a chance that he could leave. It's more the fact, obviously, the timing isn't ideal for Bournemouth. However, once they received kind of indication Solanke wanted the move, they were prepared to negotiate that sale and look at getting that deal done as quickly as possible. So it gives them enough time to bring in replacements and adapt to life without Solanke, who was, of course, so important last season. I think the timing of the move is interesting, given the Richarlison rumours yesterday. Well, not rumours, but he came out and pretty much declared he wants to stay at Spurs. But as others have reported, interest in Solanke was totally independent of Richarlison. Although he's been wanted by Al Hilal in the Saudi Pro League, it wasn't. Spurs signing a striker was never dependent on him leaving although it would have helped out financially.
Ryan, talking about Richarlison, of course, he said he wants to stay in the Premier League, and then he posted an Instagram story saying, "I'm at home here," with a picture of him celebrating at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Other reports have stated that he would be sold if a decent offer come in for him. Is there truth in that? Is Richarlison so-called up for sale now if the Solanke was to come in? And also what I wanted to ask is, there's been so many links with Ivan Toney. Is there a chance, or am I being too greedy as a Spurs fan here? Is there a chance that Spurs could even sign 2 strikers in the next 3 weeks?
It's a good question. I think ultimately that will hinge on Richarlison's situation. I think there's a difference between willing to consider bids and up for sale. I think up for sale would sort of indicate that the club just want the player to go, whoever that may be. Obviously, in this instance, we're talking about Richarlison. However, my understanding is that they would consider offers, because Richarlison, I believe he's only got, you might correct me on this, I believe he's only got 3 years left on his deal. Obviously, he's been hit and miss a little bit at Spurs, started to show good form last season. But at 27, there is kind of that notion that, is he actually going to get much better? I mean, I know you can probably tie that into Solanke, but Solanke's stats suggest he's a player that, might have another level to reach. He might be able to get 25 Premier League goals, whereas Richarlison has struggled with injuries. I think, going back to your initial question, I think obviously if Richarlison leaves, it goes without saying that Spurs would probably consider another striker. I don't know too much about Toney at this stage. I haven't chased that one up, so I'm not prepared to say whether Spurs are interested or not. I know others have reported there is interest. But if Richarlison left, and obviously Brentford do need to consider offers for Toney this summer because of his contract situation, then yeah, I would say that might be one that is considered. However, on the personal term side, when you've got Solanke coming in for a £60 million fee, Toney might sort of speculate as to whether he would be a main man at Tottenham. So I don't know about that. There's moving parts on that front, and we're talking incredibly hypothetically here, so nothing concrete on that.
Ryan, what do you actually expect Spurs to do in the next 3 weeks? Because, of course, there is now only 21 days left of the window. If Solanke does get over the line, it has been widely reported in the last couple of weeks that Spurs want to also add a winger and a left-back. Is that true? Would you go along with that? And would you expect the 3 signings to come in the next 3 weeks?
I know that the Neto and Eze interest is 100% there. It was one that was confirmed to me at the start of the window. Whether Spurs would have the financial leverage to facilitate either deal at this stage after doing Solanke, I don't know. Clubs don't often really talk about their finances, and the world we're in at the moment with the tightening of the PSR rules, it's really difficult to actually forecast how much cash these clubs have to spend, because they have to be so careful now. One big signing could ultimately, prove hindering in terms of balancing the books by the end of the financial year. So, obviously, the accountants at Spurs would probably be able to give you a clear indication of that. However, the interest in both players is there, as I mentioned. Eze is one that I know for a fact is a player that knows he could move before the end of the window. I've been told that directly. Neto is obviously one that Gary O'Neill has said that, if a big offer comes in, that they would definitely consider it. Obviously, 2 different players. Eze is more of a number 10, but he can operate from that left-hand side, whereas Neto is a right-sided winger that can cut in. And obviously, Spurs do have Kulusevski of that mould. Brennan Johnson is, I still think he's a really bright player that could really kick on in the next few years. So is it a priority? I'm not sure. Obviously, you've got Son as well, that if Solanke comes in, he can probably take that left spot, and as opposed to rotating between a central role and the left. Timo Werner as well. So I think Spurs are really well stocked. So I wouldn't like to say he would be the preference out of Neto and Eze. Obviously, 2 different players. Eze is definitely one that you should keep an eye on. Not so sure on Neto, but I know the interest is there. It has been all summer. In terms of a left back, I don't have any concrete information on a left back, but the way Ange works, it looks like Emerson's going to go to AC Milan. I know Spence is impressed, so maybe right back might be one they look at. I know Vanderson from Monaco is a player they looked at earlier in the window. but there's moving parts in all of this. It depends on other things like how much money is generated from other departures. Players like Oliver Skipp could possibly leave, which might give Spurs a bit of a cash injection to look at, another area of the pitch. So moving parts, I'd say, would be the two clear words that I would use for Spurs' window.
A couple of quick ones, Ryan. Jed Spence, would you expect him now to stay at the club and push for a place in the side?
It's weird because I've got regular contact with Spence's camp, and I have done since Spurs were trying to sign him from Forest. And at the start of the summer, it really looks almost set in stone that he was going to leave Tottenham, that he had no future. But he's come back, and as Alistair Gold has reported throughout his great coverage of the tour of Asia, Spence made a great impression in pre-season. I haven't actually spoken to Spence's camp in the past week or so, but I would think he would like to. I've always been told that he would like to prove his worth at Spurs because obviously he's not really had an opportunity to do so. So he could be an option to provide cover and competition for Pedro Porro. Obviously, he is a little bit more of an attacking fullback. He's more of a wing back, and Spurs play that back four. But the same was really said of Porro at Sporting. He was more of a wing back, but he's adjusted nicely and sort of his game's become more well-rounded. So, as again, I say moving parts, it's one that Andrew will ultimately probably have the final call on, whether he thinks Spence is ready for that role. There has been interest in other players. Kyle Walker-Peters, obviously an ex-Spurs player, is a player that Spurs appreciate, obviously homegrown as well. Wouldn't cost an awful lot of money. But nothing concrete on that side at the moment. Things change so quickly. You could wake up tomorrow and Spurs may be in talks to sign someone else. So that's just my understanding of the situation.
With Eze, is there any truth that his release clause is only open to teams playing in the Champions League? And also, what I wanted to ask you, is there any truth in Spurs being put off by buying Eze because Crystal Palace want all of the money as a one lump sum?
I don't know, unfortunately, Chris. I'd love to be able to say I do know, but I don't know. All I know is it's a release clause, which is a complex release clause. So it's not necessarily like a mechanism where you pay the money and you get it straight away. I think what that refers to is probably the type of club that can trigger it, like we said with Solanke.
Yeah.
Obviously, Spurs do fall into a certain category, although they're not a Champions League club. They are considered one of the big six in the Premier League. They've got European football as well. So I don't know for certain if they can trigger it, and there's not been a lot of clear reporting around the release clause and the terms of it because clubs ultimately can't disclose it. It's a contractual agreement. So even if I was to ask about this directly with Palace, for instance, it's not something that necessarily gets shared because it's it's discreet information.
Right, and of course, Spurs throughout the window so far, and particularly from the end of last season, we've been linked to so many forwards and so many strikers.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you about Dominic Solanke, is this a brand new target, or have Spurs been tracking him for some time? Has there been interest for some time in him?
Yeah, 100%. I don't think, unless it's like a reactive signing that's been floated by an agent and it's late in the window when there's been injuries and you're scrambling about, I don't think any signing for that level of money would not be a player that's been tracked heavily for a long time. Obviously, it's only sort of emerged in the past few weeks that Solanke's a leading target for Spurs. But they have been doing their due diligence on him for the past couple of months. Obviously, I'm pretty sure every top club in the Premier League will have appreciated his numbers last season. I think his points per goal was something ridiculous. Like, it really sort of fired Bournemouth up the table from the relegation places because he was so instrumental. I've always liked Solanke, and his numbers in the Championship were great. But obviously there is always that sort of question mark hanging over him about whether he is actually a top level striker. And I think he's really showed that this season, that he can actually, he's not a Harry Kane. Don't get me wrong. I'm not getting carried away. We know he's not a sort of world-class finisher, but in terms of his qualities, he brings a lot to the party. As I said, he presses, he's good in the air. And having covered quite a few Bournemouth games last season, he's actually got quite a big physical frame. And I think when you've got pace to match with that as well, he's a real handful for defenders. He doesn't really give them any peace. And I think that's why Ange is probably so big on signing him, because, as I said, he's a player that there's a lot of qualities. Even if he doesn't score, he affects the game, and he presses and he creates space for other forwards. So I think he's going to be a real handful next season if Spurs get that deal done.
Ryan, just talking about some possible departures, you mentioned Emerson Royale. It looks like documents are now being exchanged with AC Milan for him, so that's great news. Spurs have done very well on getting players out the door since Postecoglou has arrived. But there have been a lot of reports about players like Oliver Skipp, Manor Solomon, Sergio Reguilon, Giovanni Lo Celso even. Any updates on any of them and possible departures?
No, nothing concrete. I'll go through them. So Skipp, it's pretty clear that his playing time there's no promises of game time at Spurs. If he's to stay, then it's to be a squad player that sort of slots into multiple roles. I know he played fullback at times last year. Obviously, he's homegrown, which is one of the reasons why Spurs have been reluctant to sell to the first team that's come in for him. I don't believe there's been any offers, but he's definitely one that could leave in the transfer window. Because he's homegrown, he may need to be replaced. Some of the experts in the comments may be able to provide a clearer number of how many homegrown players Spurs has got, but I know they've been sailing close to the wind in recent times. They've lost the likes of Sessegnon this season, so that's another factor, as I mentioned, why Solanke's been pursued. Lo Celso, Betis held talks at the start of the transfer window, which is, of course, his former team. He was suggested as make weight in that potential deal for Jacob Ramsey, who's a player Spurs still like. Nothing concrete at the moment. I think his representatives are due to meet with Spurs to sort of discuss his options heading into the final weeks of the window. Which other ones did you mention, Chris? Sorry.
Manor Solomon and Reguilon.
Manor Solomon can go out on loan probably. Obviously, Spurs got him on a free, so they're in quite a good position with him. I'm quite surprised, really, at the sort of. I've seen some of the comments from Spurs fans on Twitter in recent days about Solomon. They don't tend to rate him. But at the start of the season, I think it was Burnley away. I was thinking at the time, Solomon looks like he could be a really good squad player that can chip in. He looked quite dangerous, but obviously he's had that injury, which was nasty. But it's a win-win for Spurs with Solomon because they can get value for him, and any money that they get for him, they can look at signing an upgrade. So I think from a ruthless perspective, he is probably a player they will look to move on. And the last one was
Sergio Reguilon. I saw a report yesterday linking him to Galatasaray. Any truth in that one?
You have to take the Turkish rumours with a pinch of salt, Chris, because I think I've even been linked with a move to Fenerbahce in recent months. But I don't know for certain. I think Galatasaray, obviously, a team that they do like to shop in the Premier League for players that are available on the cheap. And Reguilon's certainly a sturdy competitor. He done well on loan at Brentford. If Spurs were to move for Toney, I think he might be a player worth chucking into a deal for Toney, because Brentford need a left back at the moment. But I'm told he wants to play European football. Obviously, he's got a lot of pedigree, Reguilon, having played for Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid as well. So I'd probably see him departing more likely on a loan, just because clubs are reluctant to sort of pay permanent cash for these kind of players, because it's just easy to get them on loan nowadays, particularly Italian clubs. You very rarely see Italian clubs come in with a big cash offer. It's usually a loan. So I expect some of those players to move on, but nothing really concrete at this stage. The only concrete one is Royale, as you've covered.
Brian, two last questions for you. Because we have signed Timo Werner on loan for another season, does that mean that Spurs are not going to sign a winger in this transfer window, or doesn't that matter? And the last question for you, Jamie Donnelly and Will Lancashire, would you expect both of them to go out on loan after impressing Ange Postecoglou in pre-season?
Yeah, so on the winger, I don't think it is independent of what you said about Werner. It doesn't necessarily mean Spurs won't get a winger. I think that was a very smart deal from Spurs. I know it kind of was scrutinised when it happened, but it's clever because Werner is a player that, if he's in the starting 11, he's not out of place. He still affects the game. He seems to have mastered that sprint to the byline and left-footed cutback across the box, which has created a lot of assists. So I think that deal sort of buys Spurs a little bit of time. So I think it was smart. Obviously, financially, it's favourable as well because you're not paying a fee for him, and you're not then stuck with an aging forward on decent wages if they were to bring someone in. So it doesn't mean they're not going to look at getting another player in. I still think there is interest in Eze and Neto. And then going back to Lancashire and Donnelly, both have impressed in pre-season. I know Middlesbrough have looked at Lancashire, but the club have looked at, buying a bit of time just to seeing how he features over pre-season. But I think a loan is probably more likely for him. Jamie Donnelly, obviously a lot of clubs have come in for him as well in League One, Enquiries, Championship, loan interest. I don't have any concrete information, but I would say if there's a move that benefits his development where regular game time is on offer, it might be one Spurs look at. That being said, obviously Spurs have Europa League football this season and there's cup competitions. So, there is potential opportunities for minutes. And don't forget, the academy football nowadays, especially the PL2, is great for these youngsters because they're gaining confidence. They're playing every week minutes, although it's not quite senior football where it's a little bit more physical. He can play in first team training as well and still, benefit his development from that perspective. So it's one Spurs need to weigh up, but nothing concrete at the moment on either of those two. But there has been inquiries.
We walked the league last season, Ryan. We actually won trophies, believe it or not.
Yes, you did.
You're always such a fantastic guest. I could talk to you forever about football and Tottenham, so thank you so much. Ryan, where can people find you and your wonderful articles with the Daily Mirror?
Well, you can find them on the Mirror website or in the paper. But my Twitter username is Ryan Taylor Sport. If you want to follow, I'm covering London football and a lot of Spurs. So it would. I'm sure there'll be a few more things to talk about before the window closes, and I'm sure we'll be able to squeeze in another chat closer to the deadline. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. I look forward to it, Ryan. Great to have you back, and
thanks, Chris.
Again soon. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening, and come on, you Spurs.